I'm continuing my series of Mash Wikia reviews with Season 3, Episode 6, Springtime. So it's spring at the 477. Quite literally, it's described as it's a pleasant spring day following apparently lots of brutal cold. Now I do wonder, was it actually brutal cold when they filmed it? Because there was a habit in MASH where it somehow ended up being brutally cold when they were filming hot weather scenes and blistering hot when they were filming cold weather scenes. And I don't think that's this case, but it would be kind of funny if the weather for filming wasn't actually pleasant. But it's a pleasant spring day, because Hawkeye just wants to sleep, and the Radar develops a crush on a nurse Simmons. Radar, of course, is ignoring her because she ignored him because he's ignoring her. And Hawkeye and Chopper give him the sound advice, just ask her to the movies. Now, Nurse Simmons isn't interested in movies, more interested in poetry, but that's alright because Radar has a poetry book that he got from Klinger because Klinger left it behind when Radar gave Klinger some mail from Laverne. And by the way, Laverne is Klinger's high school sweetheart, and she said yes to marrying him. Of course, characters jokes that has Laverne seen Klinger recently. I have to suspect that at least one of Klinger's dresses came from Laverne. I really wish they threw that line in there because I think that would have been a note to kind of show that they do have a connection. Now, I do know from later episodes the marriage falls apart. Probably helps that they didn't get married in person. Instead, they got married over radio. Klinger wanted to go home, but Henry was not having it. It probably also doesn't help that Klinger has had a long list of ploys to try to get the army to send him home. Wearing dresses is just one of them. He's lied about family dying, family being pregnant, so many other things that could potentially get him a hardship discharge. And so you can see why Henry's like, if I let you go back to Toledo to get married, you're not coming back. And that is probably the truth. It all comes together at the very end because while Nurse Simmons is not interested in going to the movies with Radar, Radar does bring the poetry book to her tent, and she throws herself at Radar quite literally, and Radar only had to read like 2 lines of poetry. And Radar's a bit confused. Probably because he's never gotten that kind of a reaction before out of any of the women he's been interested in. And the episode ends then with the radio marriage ceremony between Klinger and Laverne, performed by Father Mulcahy. And of course, they're going to a ham radio operator in Iowa who's then telephoning the church where Laverne is, and there's another line going up to an extension for Laverne's parents. Complicated logistics. And then, of course, there's another plot line going on during this 2 points. One, Hawkeye had saved a Marine, and the Marine decided that he's going to basically try to repay Hawkeye. And, just the Marine's using his strength to basically get people to do stuff such as make room at the table in the mess tent for Hawkeye and Chopper, get their food for them, and even though Ego doesn't want to listen to the Marine's orders. The Marine's name is Lyle, by the way. If there's also going on during this, there's a soldier in post-op who is holding a cat and won't let it go. Father Mulcahy brings this to Hawkeye's attention, and Hawkeye suggests that they get a professional psychiatrist who never comes. Obviously, they were not able to tap the actor who plays Sidney Freeman for this episode. And by the way, there is one of Father Mulcahy's lines is dubbed over in this episode because the audio changes when him and Hawkeye are walking into the room for post-op. An interesting thing I caught in this episode. But later on in the episode, Frank is trying to forcefully remove the cat from the soldier, which is not going well. Frank is being himself, not thinking things through. Frank really does not think mental health is important. And then Hawkeye does then try to talk the soldier, who, by the way, they don't know the name of the soldier because the soldier lost his identifications and is not talking. Does convince the soldier to give the cat up, but then puts Hawkeye in a chokehold. And the Marine Liar comes in and uses his strength to get Hawkeye out of the chokehold. Now, I do want to say a couple things. Hawkeye then tries to use that to get the Marine to back off on basically trying to repay the debt that the Marine thinks he has to Hawkeye for Hawkeye saving him. that doesn't quite work out. But another thing, that is one well-behaved cat. I should have tried to bring my cat in here, and she would not be. She does not like being on camera. This is a very well-behaved cat, and obviously the cat was probably only being held for the actual scenes that the cat was needed to be on screen for. But if we take in universe, there is no way, no effing way, that a cat would be that willing to be held for multiple hours at a time. There's just no possible way. Cats are not built that way. They don't mind being held, but when they're done, they are done. And so, yeah, I take issue with that thing because with what I know of cat behavior, the longest I think I've ever held my cat for is like 5 minutes. And that's pushing it. And I have never seen a cat wanting to be held that long. Even the cats that love being held, they eventually come to like, I'm done. But that's a totally separate thing from the story being told. And to be fair, cats are actually quite compassionate. They can be arrogant little jerks at times, and that's why we love them. But they can be quite compassionate. And it's that cat sense that this soldier needed comfort. That cat, and especially if the cat felt safe, that cat in the story would have been more likely to stay longer than necessary. And then the cat would have preferred, because cats are actually very compassionate, just on their terms. And then, of course, one last thing with Lyra the Marine. During Laverne and Klinger's wedding, Frank and Margaret come in. Frank is basically insulting everyone. Oh, Hawkeye also does insult Margaret at one point. But Frank basically just keeps on getting it in. Lyra takes Frank up and starts spinning him and gets him to agree not to report anything and all that. That should have been a wake-up call for Frank. That Marine was somebody who was not going to give Frank any deference because of his rank. Somebody Frank could not appeal to for military bearing. Frank could have learned a lesson there, but he didn't. Now granted, Frank as a character never really grew. The only way to develop Frank is to learn more about him. He's a character who's trapped in his status quo, who's unable to change. That's who his character is, and his character may not have worked if they chose to develop his character, move him beyond his character flaws, and that's how we can only learn more about him, but not make him grow, unlike other characters. But that's kind of more of a side tangent thing. I just wanted to bring that up, how this could have been a moment that they wanted to make Frank a character who could grow and change. This would have been a great moment to do so, but they choose not to, instead to continue on with the only development with Frank is learning about him, not having him grow. But again, that's more of a sidetrack thing, not a big part of this episode. And another thing I want to address in this review is this episode treats the humor around Klinger wearing a dress differently than previous episodes and future episodes. Most of the time, the humor around Klinger wearing a dress is not that he's a guy wearing a dress, but he's wearing a dress to get out of the army. But because everyone knows he's wearing a dress to get out of the army, he'll never get out of the army. The humor is in the fact that he's doing a task that will never succeed. That's where I think the humor is truly coming from. Yes, in narrative, Klinger is definitely playing on what we would now call homophobia and transphobia in the army during the Korean War. And the writers are definitely calling back to that as well. But this episode, the humor is more at Klinger wearing a dress. Colonel Blake makes the remark that has Laverne seen Klinger recently, i.e. implying that she wouldn't want to marry him if she knew that Klinger was wearing dresses. I think it would have been great if Klinger had a line to retort that one of his, maybe the dress he was wearing came from Laverne. They didn't do that. I wish they did, but that joke there was playing more into humor at the expense of people who wear dresses, especially guys who choose to wear dresses, rather than he's wearing a dress to get out of the army but he'll never get out. And then later on during the ceremony, Father Mulcahy pauses during his line asking Laverne, does she take this? And then he pauses before he says, man. Again, that's not very much into Father Mulcahy's character. Maybe a Catholic priest character, but not Father Mulcahy's character. Because most of the time, all these characters are just, most of the time, Klinger wearing a dress is not the humor part. It's that he's doing it to get out of the army and he won't. That's what the humor normally is. Not all the time, but oftentimes, especially the best jokes. But here, they made the jokes. The writers chose to make the jokes about Klinger wearing a dress, tapping into more homophobia and transphobia. Now, back then, they would have called Klinger most likely a transvestite. Terminology does change over the time, but the point being is the jokes here are worse than in other episodes regarding Klinger wearing a dress, because it works best when the characters let him wear a dress, they accept him for wearing a dress, and the joke is that he's doing it to get out of the army, but he's never going to get out. That's when the humor is the best. And they didn't do that in this episode, and that is a down on this episode. Of course, despite that, the rest of the jokes are pretty solid, and I think landed pretty well. It's just those jokes that are an unfortunate block on a otherwise pretty good episode of MASH. But those are just my thoughts. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching my video. I do hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please be sure to give this video a like and share. Also, consider subscribing to my channel to stay up to date on all my latest videos. In the meantime, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good day, a good night, wherever you are. May the force be with you, always.